The glass towers of downtown Seattle gleamed like silver needles against the overcast sky as rain drummed steadily against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor executive suite. Inside the pristine conference room, 30 of the most powerful business minds in the Pacific Northwest sat around a mahogany table that cost more than most people's annual salaries. At the head of that table sat Daniel Cross, his steel-gray eyes scanning the quarterly reports with the precision of a hawk eyeing its prey. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 38, Daniel had built Cross-Tech Industries from a small software startup into a multi-billion-dollar empire that dominated the cloud computing market. His tailored charcoal suit, perfectly styled dark hair, and commanding presence spoke of a man who had never known failure. Every decision he made sent ripples through the tech industry. Every word he spoke could shift stock prices, and every move he calculated could make or break careers. The meeting had been running for 2 hours, dissecting market projections and expansion strategies with the methodical efficiency that had made Daniel legendary in Silicon Valley. His vice president of operations, Chen, was presenting the latest acquisition proposal when the massive oak doors to the conference room burst open without warning. The room fell silent as all eyes turned toward the unexpected intrusion. Daniel's assistant, Margaret, stood in the doorway, her usually composite manure shattered. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a manila envelope against her chest. Margaret had worked for Daniel for 8 years, weathering hostile takeovers, corporate espionage attempts, and board member rebellions without ever losing her professional composure. But now, she looked like she had seen a ghost. Margaret. Daniel's voice carried the sharp edge of authority that had silenced countless boardrooms. "We're in the middle of a presentation." "This better be—" "Sir," Margaret interrupted, something she had never done in 8 years of employment. Her voice cracked slightly. There's a detective here." "About Jessica." The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. Jessica. His twin sister. The other half of his soul who had been ripped away from him 2 decades ago in a senseless act of violence that had never been solved. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and Daniel gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. "What did you say?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence of the conference room, it carried like thunder. Margaret swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously around the room full of executives who were now witnessing something they had never seen before. Daniel Cross completely off balance. "Detective Rivera from Seattle PD, she says. There's been a development in Jessica's case. A significant development." The manila envelope in Margaret's hands suddenly seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Daniel stared at it, his mind racing back 20 years to that terrible night when his world had shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. Jessica Cross, his identical twin sister, had been found dead in her apartment on a rainy October evening in 2004. The case had consumed the local media for months, but despite countless leads and investigations, her killer had never been found. Eventually, the case had gone cold, filed away in some dusty police archive, while Daniel had thrown himself into building his empire as a way to escape the crushing grief. "Send her in," Daniel said, his voice hollow. He looked around the table at the expectant faces of his executives. "This meeting is adjourned. We'll reconvene tomorrow." There was a murmur of confusion and concern as the board members began to gather their papers and laptops. Chen hesitated at the door, her expression filled with worry. "Daniel, if you need anything, I'm fine," he cut her off, though they both knew it was a lie. "Just handle the Morrison acquisition. I trust your judgment." As the last executive filed out, Margaret stepped aside to allow a woman in her 40s to enter. Detective Maria Rivera was average height with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. wearing a rumpled navy blue suit that had seen better days. She carried herself with the weary confidence of someone who had spent decades walking through the worst moments of people's lives. "Mr. Cross," she said, extending a calloused hand. "I'm Detective Rivera. I know this is unexpected, but I need to speak with you about your sister's case." Daniel remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the detective's face. Jessica's case was closed. Unsolved, but closed. What could possibly have changed after 20 years? Detective Rivera reached into her jacket and pulled out a thick folder, its edges worn from handling. 3 days ago, we arrested a man named Marcus Webb for an unrelated assault. During questioning, he mentioned something about Jessica's death. Something only the killer would know. The words seemed to echo in the vast conference room. Daniel felt his knees weaken, and he slowly sank into his leather chair. "What did he say?" "Before I get into that," Rivera said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him, "I need to ask you some questions. About Jessica's life before she died. About relationships, finances, anything that might have put her in danger." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that would have shocked his employees who had never seen him display even a hint of vulnerability. "Detective, I've been through this countless times with your predecessors. Jessica was a kindergarten teacher. She lived alone in a modest apartment in Belltown. She had no enemies, no dangerous relationships, no involvement in anything that would put her at risk. She was the gentlest person I've ever known." "That's what everyone said 20 years ago," Rivera nodded. "But sometimes, Mr. Cross, the people we think we know best are the ones hiding the biggest secrets." She opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. It was a picture of Jessica, taken just months before her death. She was standing in front of a classroom decorated with colorful alphabet letters and children's artwork, her smile bright and genuine. Daniel's chest tightened as he looked at the image. Even after all these years, seeing Jessica's face felt like looking into a mirror that reflected not just his physical features, but the part of his soul that had died with her. "Your sister was 28 when she died," Rivera continued. "Single, no children, living alone. But according to Marcus Webb, she was involved in something that cost her her life. Something she kept hidden from everyone, including you." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "What kind of something?" Rivera hesitated, then pulled out another document. "Mr. Cross, I need you to prepare yourself. What I'm about to tell you might change everything you thought you knew about Jessica." The rain continued to pound against the windows, each drop seeming to hammer against Daniel's composure. He had spent 20 years building walls around the pain of Jessica's death, channeling his grief into the relentless pursuit of success. Now those walls were beginning to crack. "Tell me," he said. Simply, Rivera took a deep breath. According to Webb, Jessica was involved in some kind of arrangement. Something that involved regular payments, secrecy, and someone who was very determined to keep certain information from coming to light. "What kind of arrangement?" "That's what we need to find out. Webb claims he was hired to silence her. But he's not talking about who hired him or why. He's asking for a deal, and he'll only speak to you." Daniel's blood ran cold. "To me? Why would he want to speak to me?" "Because," Rivera said, her voice gentle but firm, "according to Webb, Jessica left something behind. Something that proves she was protecting someone she loved more than her own life." The room fell silent except for the steady rhythm of rain against glass. Daniel stared at the photograph of his sister, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. Jessica, his sweet, innocent twin sister who had dedicated her life to teaching children and volunteering at animal shelters, had been keeping secrets, dangerous secrets that had gotten her killed. "I need to see him," Daniel said finally. "I need to talk to this Webb." Rivera shook her head. "Mr. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Cross, I understand your desire for answers, but— Detective, Daniel interrupted, his voice taking on the commanding tone that had made him one of the most feared negotiators in the business world. My sister has been dead for 20 years. For 20 years, I've wondered who killed her and why. If this man has answers, I need to hear them. It's not that simple. Webb is dangerous. He's been linked to at least 3 other murders, and he specifically requested to speak with you alone. No lawyers, no recording devices, no witnesses. Just you. Daniel stood up, his decision made. Then that's what he'll get. Rivera studied his face, seeing the determination that had built a billion-dollar empire. Mr. Cross, I can't officially recommend this, but I can tell you that Webb has information about Jessica's final days that no one else has. Things she did, places she went, people she met. If you want the truth about what happened to your sister, he might be the only one who can give it to you. Daniel walked to the window, looking out at the city he had conquered while his sister's killer walked free. When can I see him? Tomorrow morning. King County Jail. But Mr. Cross, Rivera's voice took on a warning tone. Once you hear what he has to say, there's no going back. Sometimes the truth is more painful than not knowing. Daniel turned back to face her, his jaw set with determination. Detective, I've spent every day for the past 20 years wondering what happened to Jessica. I've built this company, achieved everything I ever dreamed of, but none of it matters because the most important person in my life was taken from me, and I never knew why. If there's a chance to finally get answers, I'll take it. Rivera nodded slowly, then gathered her papers. I'll make the arrangements, but Mr. Cross, I need you to understand something. Your sister's case is about to be reopened, and when it is, everything about her life is going to be scrutinized. Things might come to light that you're not prepared for. After the detective left, Daniel stood alone in the conference room, staring at the photograph of Jessica that Rivera had left behind. His reflection in the rain-streaked window showed a man who looked exactly like his sister, down to the same piercing blue eyes and stubborn jawline. They had been 2 halves of a whole, born 3 minutes apart and inseparable until the day she died. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. It rang twice before a small voice answered. Hello? Hey, buddy, Daniel said, his voice softening in a way that would have surprised his business associates. It's Dad. How was school today? 8-year-old Tommy Cross launched into an animated description of his day, talking about math tests and playground adventures with the enthusiasm that only children possessed. Daniel listened, letting his son's innocent chatter wash over him like a balm for his wounded soul. Dad, are you okay? Tommy asked suddenly, his voice taking on a more serious tone. You sound sad. Daniel closed his eyes, amazed at how perceptive his son could be. I'm fine, buddy. Just thinking about Aunt Jessica. There was a pause. Tommy had never met his aunt, but he had heard stories about her and seen pictures. The one who taught little kids like me? That's right. She would have loved you so much. I wish I could have met her, Tommy said quietly. Maybe she could have helped me with my reading. I'm still not very good at it. Daniel's heart clenched. You're doing great with your reading, son. And you know what? Aunt Jessica would be so proud of how hard you're working. After he hung up, Daniel sat in the growing darkness of his office, the city lights beginning to twinkle below. Tomorrow he would face the man who had killed his sister and learn secrets that Jessica had died to protect. But tonight he allowed himself to remember the woman who had shaped his life in ways that success and wealth never could. Jessica had been his anchor, his conscience, his reminder that there was good in the world worth fighting for. When their parents died in a car accident when they were 16, Jessica had been the one to keep him grounded, to remind him that they still had each other. When he had started his company and worked 18-hour days, Jessica had been the One to drag him away from his computer, to remind him that life was about more than profit margins and market share. She had been planning to visit him the week she died. Daniel remembered the phone call. How excited she had sounded about seeing his new office and meeting his college girlfriend. She had been saving up for months to buy a plane ticket from Seattle to San Francisco, where Daniel had been working on his startup. They had planned to spend a weekend together, just the two of them, like old times. But Jessica never made it to San Francisco. Instead, Daniel had flown to Seattle to identify her body and plan her funeral. He had stayed for the investigation, worked with the police, offered a substantial reward for information. When nothing came of it, he had thrown himself into his work with a vengeance, as if success could somehow fill the void his sister's death had left behind. Now 20 years later, he was finally going to learn the truth. And something told him that the man he had become, the empire he had built, the life he had constructed around his grief, was about to crumble like a house of cards. Daniel opened his laptop and began typing an email to Sarah Chen, instructing her to clear his schedule for the next week. He had a feeling that once he walked into that jail tomorrow, Daniel Cross, the CEO, would cease to exist. What would emerge from the ashes was something he wasn't sure he was ready to face. But Jessica deserved the truth, even if it destroyed him. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical for Seattle in November. Daniel had barely slept, his mind racing with possibilities about what he might learn. He had dressed in his usual business attire, a dark suit and tie that served as armor against the world. But as he stood outside King County Jail, he felt more vulnerable than he had in years. Detective Rivera met him at the entrance, her expression serious. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Cross? Once we go in there, there's no turning back." Daniel nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I need to know what happened to her." They passed through multiple security checkpoints, each one stripping away another layer of the civilized world Daniel was accustomed to, the institutional smell of disinfectant and desperation filled his nostrils as they walked down sterile corridors lined with reinforced doors. Finally, they arrived at a small interview room furnished with nothing but a metal table and 2 chairs. "He'll be here in a few minutes," Rivera said. "Remember, he's agreed to talk, but he's dangerous. Don't let your guard down." Daniel sat in the uncomfortable chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one stretching into an eternity of anticipation and dread. Then the door opened, and Daniel found himself face to face with his sister's killer. Marcus Webb was not what Daniel had expected. He was a small man, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to hold decades of secrets. His orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his thin frame, and his hands were shackled to a chain around his waist. But it was his eyes that caught Daniel's attention. They held a strange mixture of guilt and something that might have been regret. "Mr. Cross," Webb said as he sat down across from Daniel. His voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle. "I've been waiting to meet you for a very long time." Daniel felt his anger rising, but he forced himself to remain calm. "You killed my sister." Webb nodded slowly. "I did. And I've regretted it every day since." "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Webb studied Daniel's face for a long moment, as if seeing Jessica in his features. "Because she was protecting something, someone, and the person who hired me couldn't let that continue. Who hired you? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?" Webb leaned back in his chair. "But before I tell you that, you need to understand what Jessica was involved in, what she was hiding. Because, Mr. Cross, your sister wasn't the innocent kindergarten teacher everyone thought she was." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "Don't you dare. She was a good person," Webb interrupted. "Maybe the best person I ever had the misfortune to meet. But she was keeping a secret that was worth killing for. A secret that had to do with you." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. "With me? What are you talking about? Webb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. He slid it across the table to Daniel. Jessica showed me this the night she died. She said it was the most important thing in her life. Daniel picked up the photograph with trembling hands. It showed Jessica sitting in what appeared to be a hospital room, holding a small bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. Her face was radiant with joy, but there was something else in her expression, a deep sadness that seemed to contradict her smile. "I don't understand," Daniel said. "Jessica never had children, didn't she?" Webb's eyes held a knowing look. "Mr. Cross, your sister gave birth to a daughter 20 years ago. A daughter she gave up for adoption. A daughter she spent the rest of her life trying to find." The room seemed to spin around Daniel. "That's impossible. I would have known. We told each other everything." "She was protecting you," Webb said gently, "and she was protecting the child. Because the father was someone powerful, someone who couldn't afford to have an illegitimate child become public knowledge." Daniel stared at the photograph, his mind reeling. Who was the father? Webb smiled, but there was no humor in it. "That's what got her killed, Mr. Cross. Jessica had finally found her daughter. She had made contact, started building a relationship. But when she decided to tell the truth about who the father was, someone decided she had to be silenced. "Tell me who hired you." Daniel's voice was deadly quiet. "I will," Webb said. "But first, you need to understand the full scope of what Jessica was involved in. She wasn't just a kindergarten teacher, Mr. Cross. She was a single mother who had given up her child to protect both of you. She was a woman who had spent 20 years wondering about the daughter she had lost. And when she finally found her, she discovered something that changed everything." "What did she discover?" Webb leaned forward, his eyes intense. "She discovered that her daughter was in danger, real danger. And the only way to protect her was to expose the truth about who her father was, no matter the cost." Daniel felt like he was drowning in revelations. What kind of danger? The kind that comes from being connected to people who have everything to lose if certain secrets come to light. Jessica's daughter didn't just inherit her mother's looks, Mr. Cross. She inherited her grandfather's business empire. The words hit Daniel like a thunderbolt. "Grandfather? Our grandfather died when we were children." "Not that grandfather," Webb said quietly. "The other one. The one Jessica never told you about. The one who paid for her silence for 20 years until she decided that protecting her daughter was more important than protecting his reputation." Daniel's mind was racing, trying to process the implications of what he was hearing. "You're saying Jessica's daughter is heir to some kind of fortune?" "I'm saying Jessica's daughter is the key to bringing down one of the most powerful men in the country. And Jessica died trying to protect her from the same fate." Before Daniel could respond, the door burst open and Detective Rivera rushed in, her face pale with urgency. "We need to go now," she said. "There's been another murder. And this time, it's connected to Jessica's case." Webb smiled grimly as the guards moved to escort him back to his cell. "It's starting again, Mr. Cross. Jessica's daughter is in danger, and you're the only one who can save her. But first, you need to find her." "Wait," Daniel called out as Webb was led away. "What's her name? What's my niece's name?" Webb paused at the door and looked back. "Her name is Emma Parker. She's 20 years old, and she has no idea that her mother died trying to protect her. But she will soon, because the same people who killed Jessica are coming for her." As the door closed behind Webb, Daniel stood frozen in the small interview room, his entire world turned upside down. He had come here looking for answers about his sister's death, but instead, he had discovered that he had a 20-year-old niece who was in mortal danger from the same people who had killed Jessica. Detective Rivera was already on her phone, barking orders to someone on the other end. "We need protection detail on Emma Parker, age 20. currently enrolled at University of Washington. Consider her a target. Daniel found his voice. Detective, I need to see her. I need to find Emma. Rivera ended her call and turned to face him. Mr. Cross, I understand your urgency, but we need to be careful. If Webb is telling the truth, then approaching Emma could put her in more danger. Or it could save her life, Daniel countered. I'm not going to let the same thing happen to her that happened to Jessica. Rivera studied his face, seeing the determination that had built an empire now focused on protecting family. All right. But we do this my way. Official protection, safe locations, and no contact until we know exactly what we're dealing with. As they walked back through the corridors of the jail, Daniel's mind was already working on the problem. He had resources, connections, and 20 years of pent-up grief that he could channel into protecting the niece he had never known existed. But first, he needed to find out everything he could about Emma Parker and the secret that had gotten Jessica killed. The game was changing, and Daniel Cross was about to discover that the most important business deal of his life had nothing to do with corporate mergers or stock options. It had everything to do with family, truth, and the price of silence. The University of Washington campus buzzed with typical college energy as students hurried between classes, their backpacks weighted down with textbooks and their minds focused on midterm exams. Among them, 20-year-old Emma Parker walked with quiet confidence toward the psychology building, her long auburn hair catching the weak Seattle sunlight that had managed to break through the perpetual cloud cover. Emma had always felt different from her peers, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. While other students complained about their overbearing parents or boring family dinners, Emma found herself envying their connections. She had been raised by loving adoptive parents, Robert and Linda Parker, who had given her every opportunity and showered her with affection. But there had always been an empty space in her heart where questions about her biological family lived. Her adoptive parents had been open about the adoption from the beginning, but the details were frustratingly sparse. A young mother who couldn't provide for her child. A closed adoption with no contact information. Records sealed by the court. Emma had accepted these explanations for most of her life, but as she approached her 21st birthday, the need to know more about her origins had become almost overwhelming. What Emma didn't know was that 3 blocks away, Daniel Cross sat in the back of an unmarked police car, studying a thick file that Detective Rivera had compiled on his newfound niece. The photograph showed a young woman who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Jessica, with the same intelligent eyes and determined set to her jaw that had characterized his sister. But there was something else in Emma's face, a strength and resilience that spoke of someone who had faced challenges and emerged stronger. According to the file, Emma was a psychology major with a minor in social work, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while working part-time at a local community center helping underprivileged children. She lived in a modest apartment near campus with her roommate, drove an aging Honda Civic, and had no idea that her biological mother had been murdered, or that she was now being watched by people who wished her harm. Detective Rivera finished a phone call and turned to Daniel. We've got surveillance teams in place around her apartment and the campus. So far, no sign of any threats, but we're not taking any chances. Daniel continued staring at the photographs. She looks so much like Jessica. How is it possible that I never knew? Your sister went to great lengths to keep this secret, Rivera replied. We've been digging into her past, and it's clear she lived a double life for the last few years before her death. She was working with a private investigator to find Emma, spending her savings on the search. A private investigator? Who? Rivera pulled out another file. His name was Robert Chen. He helped Jessica track down Emma through the adoption agency. But here's where it gets interesting. Chen was found dead in his office 2 weeks after Jessica's murder. Apparent suicide, according to the original investigation. Daniel's blood ran cold. But you don't think it was suicide, Not anymore. We're reopening Chen's case as well. Too many coincidences, too many loose ends that were never properly investigated. Through the car window, Daniel watched as Emma emerged from the psychology building and walked across the campus quad. She moved with purpose and grace, stopping to help a student who had dropped their books and sharing a laugh with friends she passed along the way. Everything about her radiated the same warmth and compassion that had defined Jessica's character. "I need to meet her," Daniel said quietly. "Daniel, we've been over this. It's too dangerous. We don't know who's watching her or what they're planning. Then we need to find out." Daniel's voice carried the same commanding tone that had intimidated countless business adversaries. "I want to know everything about Emma's life. Her friends, her professors, her routines. I want to know who she talks to, where she goes, what she dreams about. And I want to know why someone thinks she's dangerous enough to kill." Rivera sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing with a man who had built an empire through sheer force of will. "We're already working on it. But Daniel, you need to understand that approaching Emma could trigger whatever plan is already in motion. The people who killed Jessica have been content to leave Emma alone for 20 years. Something has changed, and we need to figure out what before we make any moves." That evening, Emma sat in her cramped apartment, textbooks spread across her kitchen table as she worked on a research paper about childhood trauma and resilience. Her roommate, Sarah, had gone home for the weekend, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts and the persistent feeling that she was being watched. It wasn't the first time she had felt this way. For the past few weeks, Emma had noticed the same man in the coffee shop where she studied, the same car parked outside her apartment. Building on multiple occasions, the same face in crowds when she thought no one was looking. She had convinced herself it was paranoia, stress from midterms and her part-time job, but the feeling persisted. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Emma frowned as she read the simple message, "Your mother loved you more than life itself." Emma's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. Her adoptive mother was visiting her sister in Portland and wouldn't be texting from a strange number. This had to be about her biological mother. But who would send such a message, and why now? She typed back quickly, "Who is this? How do you know about my mother?" The response came immediately, "Meet me tomorrow at Pike Place Market, noon. Come alone. I have answers to questions you've been asking your whole life." Emma's heart pounded as she read the message. Every instinct told her this was dangerous, that she should ignore the text and pretend it never happened. But the desperate need to know about her biological family overrode her caution. She had been searching for these answers for years, and now someone was offering them freely. She typed back, "How will I know who you are?" "I'll know you. You look exactly like her." Emma spent the rest of the evening pacing her apartment, alternating between excitement and terror. Tomorrow she might finally learn the truth about where she came from and why she had been given up for adoption. But something about the mysterious text messages felt ominous, as if she was stepping into something much larger and more dangerous than she could imagine. Meanwhile, across the city in his penthouse office, Daniel was having his own sleepless night. He had spent hours on the phone with private investigators, security firms, and tech specialists, building a protective network around Emma without her knowledge. His assistant Margaret had been working overtime, coordinating with Detective Rivera, and managing the logistics of what was essentially a covert protection operation. But as Daniel stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the Seattle skyline, his mind kept returning to Jessica and the secrets she had carried to her grave. How had his sister managed to hide an entire pregnancy from him? Where had she gone when she disappeared for those months when they were 18? And most importantly, who was the father of Emma's child, and why was his identity worth killing for? Daniel picked up his phone and called the one person who might have answers, Dr. Elizabeth. Warren had been Jessica's best friend since college, a fellow teacher who had remained close to Jessica until her death. If anyone knew about Jessica's secret life, it would be Elizabeth. The phone rang several times before a sleepy voice answered. "Hello? Elizabeth, it's Daniel Cross. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need to ask you about Jessica." There was a long pause. "Daniel, it's been years. What's this about?" "I've just learned that Jessica had a daughter. A daughter she gave up for adoption 20 years ago. Did you know about this?" Another pause, longer this time. When Elizabeth spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. "Daniel, I think you should come over. There are things about Jessica that you need to know, but they're not the kind of things we should discuss over the phone." An hour later, Daniel sat in Elizabeth's living room, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold in his hands. Elizabeth, now in her late 40s with graying hair and kind eyes, looked as if she had aged a decade in the years since Jessica's death. "I knew about Emma," Elizabeth said quietly. "Jessica made me promise never to tell you, but she talked about her daughter constantly. It was the source of her greatest joy and her deepest pain. Why didn't she tell me?" "We shared everything." Elizabeth smiled sadly. "Because she was protecting you, Daniel. Just like she was protecting Emma. Jessica knew that if you learned the truth about Emma's father, you would try to do something about it, and that would put all of you in danger." "Who was he, Elizabeth? Who was Emma's father?" Elizabeth stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling out a photo album that Daniel hadn't seen before. She opened it to a page showing Jessica at 18, visibly pregnant and glowing with happiness despite the obvious stress in her eyes. Jessica was working as a summer intern at a law firm in Portland the year after we graduated high school, Elizabeth began. She was young, idealistic, and completely overwhelmed by the sophisticated world she found herself in. She met a man there, someone much older and more experienced. Someone who swept her off her feet and made her feel like the most important person in the world. Daniel studied the photographs, seeing his sister in a way he had never seen her before. What happened? She fell in love. Completely, utterly head over heels in love. He was charming, powerful, everything an 18-year-old girl would find irresistible. But he was also married, Daniel. Married with children and a career that couldn't survive the scandal of an affair with an intern. Daniel's jaw tightened. So he abandoned her. Worse than that. When Jessica told him she was pregnant, he offered to pay for an abortion. When she refused, he tried to pressure her, then threatened her. He said that if she ever revealed his identity or tried to claim paternity, he would destroy not just her but you as well. And she believed him? Elizabeth turned the page to show more photos of Jessica during her pregnancy. This man wasn't making idle threats, Daniel. He had the power to ruin lives, to destroy careers, to make people disappear. Jessica was terrified, not for herself, but for you and for the baby. So she made a decision that broke her heart but saved all of you. She gave Emma up. She gave Emma to a family that could protect her. The Parkers were carefully chosen, vetted by private investigators, and given new identities in case Emma's biological father ever tried to find her. Jessica spent every penny she had making sure Emma would be safe and loved. Daniel felt a surge of admiration for his sister's strength and sacrifice, followed immediately by rage at the man who had put her in such an impossible position. Who was he, Elizabeth? I need to know. Elizabeth closed the photo album and looked directly at Daniel. His name is Senator James Morrison. He's been in the U.S. Senate for 15 years now, and he's expected to announce his presidential campaign next month. The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. Senator James Morrison was one of the most powerful politicians in the country. A charismatic leader who had built his career on family values and moral authority. He was also a man who had enough influence to destroy anyone who threatened his carefully constructed image. Jessica was planning to expose him, Elizabeth continued. She had hired a private investigator to help her find Emma, and once she made contact, She decided that her daughter deserved to know the truth about her heritage. She was going to go public with Morrison's identity as Emma's father. And that's why she was killed. Elizabeth nodded, tears streaming down her face. Jessica knew the risks, but she said Emma had a right to know where she came from. She said that 20 years of silence was enough, that it was time for Morrison to face the consequences of his actions. Daniel stood up, his mind already working on the implications of what he had learned. Senator Morrison wasn't just Emma's father. He was a man with unlimited resources and the motivation to eliminate anyone who threatened his political ambitions. Jessica had been murdered to protect his secret, and now Emma was in danger for the same reason. There's something else, Elizabeth sighed quietly. Jessica left something for Emma, a letter explaining everything. She gave it to me before she died, with instructions to give it to Emma if anything ever happened to her. Elizabeth walked to a safe hidden behind a painting and pulled out a sealed envelope with Emma's name written in Jessica's careful handwriting. I've been carrying this burden for 20 years, Daniel. I think it's time Emma learned the truth about her mother and her father. Daniel took the letter with trembling hands, feeling the weight of Jessica's final message to the daughter she had loved but never been able to raise. We need to get this to Emma, but we need to do it safely. Morrison has already killed to protect this secret. He won't hesitate to kill again. What are you going to do? Daniel looked out the window at the city where his sister had lived and died, where his niece was now living in ignorance of the danger surrounding her. I'm going to do what Jessica couldn't. I'm going to protect Emma, and I'm going to make sure Morrison pays for what he did. The next morning, Emma arrived at Pike Place Market 15 minutes early, her nerves stretched tight with anticipation and fear. The famous Seattle landmark was crowded with tourists and locals, the air filled with the sounds of vendors hawking their wares and the smell of fresh fish and flowers. Emma positioned herself near the famous fish-throwing vendors, scanning the crowd for anyone who seemed to be looking for her. She didn't notice the surveillance team that Detective Rivera had positioned throughout the market, or the additional security personnel that Daniel had hired to ensure her safety. All she knew was that somewhere in this crowd was someone who claimed to have answers about her biological mother. At exactly noon, a middle-aged woman approached her. She was well-dressed but unremarkable, the kind of person who could blend into any crowd without attracting attention. She smiled warmly as she approached Emma, but there was something calculating in her eyes that made Emma instinctively step back. "Emma Parker?" the woman asked. "You're even more beautiful than the photograph suggested. Are you the person who texted me?" Emma asked cautiously. "I am. My name is Catherine Wells, and I worked with your mother many years ago." The woman's smile never wavered, but Emma noticed that her eyes kept darting around the crowd as if she was watching for something. "My biological mother? What can you tell me about her?" Catherine gestured toward a quieter area of the market. "Let's walk while we talk. Your mother was a remarkable woman, Emma. She loved you more than anything in the world, but she made some choices that put you both in danger." As they walked, Catherine began to spin a story about Emma's mother being involved with dangerous people, criminals who had threatened her life and forced her to give up her daughter to protect her. Emma listened with growing confusion and alarm, sensing that something about the story didn't ring true. "If my mother was in danger from criminals," Emma asked, "why hasn't anyone contacted me before now? It's been 20 years. Catherine's smile faltered slightly. "Because the danger never really went away, dear. In fact, it's getting worse. There are people who know about your connection to your mother, and they're concerned that you might try to follow in her footsteps." Emma stopped walking. "What kind of people? And what footsteps?" "The kind of people who don't hesitate to eliminate threats," Catherine said, her friendly facade beginning to slip. "Your mother thought she could expose them, bring their activities to light. That's what got her killed." The words hit Emma like a slap. "Killed? My adoption papers said my mother died in an accident." Your adoption papers lied, sweetheart. Your mother was murdered because she couldn't leave well enough alone. And now you're making the same mistake. Emma's heart pounded as she realized she had walked into a trap. This woman wasn't here to give her answers about her mother. She was here to threaten her. Emma began backing away, looking for an escape route through the crowded market. "Don't try to run," Catherine said quietly. "You're surrounded. But don't worry, we're not going to hurt you today. This is just a friendly warning. Stop asking questions about your mother. Stop digging into the past. Live your life and let sleeping dogs lie. And if I don't?" Catherine's smile turned cold. "Then you'll end up just like her." Before Emma could respond, chaos erupted around them. Detective Rivera appeared from behind a vendor stall, badge raised and gun drawn. "Seattle Police, nobody move." At the same time, Daniel emerged from the crowd, flanked by 2 private security officers. His eyes locked on Catherine with an expression of pure fury. "Get away from my niece." Catherine's composure cracked as she realized she had been surrounded by law enforcement and security personnel. She reached into her purse, but before she could draw whatever weapon she was reaching for, one of Rivera's officers tackled her to the ground. Emma stood frozen in shock as the scene unfolded around her. In the span of 30 seconds, her quiet life had exploded into violence and chaos. But it was the man who had called her his niece that captured her attention. He was tall and imposing, with piercing blue eyes that seemed familiar, though she was certain she had never seen him before. "Emma," Daniel said, approaching her slowly with his hands visible and non-threatening. "My name is Daniel Cross. I know this is overwhelming, but you're safe now. We need to talk." Emma looked from Daniel to Detective Rivera to the woman being handcuffed on the ground. "I don't understand what's happening. Who are you people? And why did you call me your niece?" Daniel's expression softened as he saw the fear and confusion in Emma's eyes. This was not how he had wanted to meet the daughter his sister had given her life to protect, but circumstances had forced his hand. "Emma, your biological mother's name was Jessica Cross. She was my twin sister. And everything you thought you knew about your past is about to change." As the police led Catherine away and the crowd of onlookers was dispersed, Emma found herself face to face with the uncle she had never known existed. The man who looked so much like her that strangers would immediately recognize them as family. The man who had just saved her life and was about to turn her world upside down with the truth about her mother's death and her own dangerous heritage. The game that had claimed Jessica's life 20 years ago was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, and Emma was now a central player whether she wanted to be or not. The only question was whether Daniel could protect her long enough to expose the truth that powerful people would kill to keep hidden. Detective Rivera approached them, holstering her weapon. "We need to get Emma somewhere safe while we sort this out. That woman is just the tip of the iceberg." Daniel nodded, his protective instincts fully engaged. "Emma, I know you have questions, and I promise I'll answer all of them. But right now, the most important thing is keeping you alive. Will you trust me?" Emma looked into his eyes and saw something she had never seen before, the unmistakable bond of family. Despite the chaos and fear surrounding her, she felt a strange sense of recognition, as if she had been waiting her whole life to meet this man who shared her features and her blood. "Yes," she said simply, "I'll trust you." As they left Pike Place Market under heavy security escort, Emma couldn't help but wonder what other secrets her biological family had been keeping. She was about to discover that being the daughter of Jessica Cross and the niece of Daniel Cross came with a price that she was only beginning to understand. The war that had claimed her mother's life was about to claim her as well, and the only weapon she had was the truth that Jessica had died trying to protect. But the truth, Emma was learning, was the most dangerous weapon of all. The safe house was nothing like Emma had expected. Tucked away in the affluent Queen Anne neighborhood, The modest two-story home looked like any other residence on the tree-lined street. But as they walked through the front door, Emma immediately noticed the subtle signs that this was no ordinary house. Reinforced windows, multiple deadbolts, and what appeared to be a sophisticated security system built seamlessly into the architecture. Daniel gestured toward a comfortable living room furnished with neutral colors and soft lighting. "I know this isn't ideal, but it's the safest place for you right now while we figure out our next move." Emma sank into an oversized armchair, her mind still reeling from the events at Pike Place Market. The woman who had threatened her, Catherine Wells, was now in police custody, but Detective Rivera had made it clear that she was likely just a foot soldier in a much larger organization. The real threat remained hidden in the shadows, pulling strings and giving orders that could end Emma's life with a simple phone call. "I still can't believe any of this is real," Emma said, running, her hands through her auburn hair. "This morning I was worried about a psychology midterm, and now I'm in hiding because someone wants to kill me for something my biological mother did 20 years ago." Daniel sat across from her, his usually commanding presence softened by concern for his newfound niece. "Emma, I need you to understand something. Your mother, Jessica, wasn't involved in anything criminal or dangerous. She was murdered because she was trying to protect you and expose the truth about your biological father." Emma looked up sharply. "My biological father?" The adoption agency said he was unknown. Daniel exchanged a glance with Detective Rivera, who had been quietly coordinating with her team from the kitchen. This was the moment they had been dreading, when Emma would learn not just that her father was alive, but that he was one of the most powerful men in the country. "Emma," Daniel began carefully, "your biological father is Senator James Morrison." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Emma stared at Daniel in disbelief, then let out a short, bitter laugh. "Senator Morrison? The man who's probably going to run for president? That's impossible." "I'm afraid it's not," Detective Rivera said, joining them in the living room with a thick folder in her hands. "We've been investigating the connection since we reopened your mother's case. Morrison was working as a junior partner at a law firm in Portland when Jessica was an 18-year-old intern. She was young, naive, and completely unprepared for someone with his sophistication and charm." Emma felt her world tilting on its axis. Senator Morrison was a man she had seen countless times on television, a charismatic leader who spoke passionately about family values and moral leadership. The idea that this pillar of American politics was her father seemed surreal beyond comprehension. "But why would my mother never tell anyone? Why give me up for adoption instead of seeking child support or acknowledgement?" Daniel's expression darkened, because Morrison threatened her. When Jessica told him she was pregnant, he made it clear that if she ever revealed his identity or tried to claim paternity, he would destroy not just her life, but mine as well. Jessica was 18 years old and terrified. She made the only choice she felt she could make to protect everyone she loved. Emma stood up abruptly and began pacing the room, her mind struggling to process this information. "So I'm the daughter of a U.S. senator, a man who's considered presidential material, and he's been trying to kill me to keep that secret hidden." "Not him directly," Rivera clarified. "Morrison is too smart to get his hands dirty, but he has connections to people who specialize in making problems disappear. Catherine Wells, the woman who approached you today, works for a private security firm that handles delicate situations for wealthy and powerful clients." Emma stopped pacing and turned to face them. "What exactly did my mother do that got her killed?" Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out the letter that Elizabeth Warren had given him the night before. The envelope was yellowed with age, and Jessica's handwriting was clearly visible on the front. "Your mother left this for you," he said gently. "It explains everything she couldn't tell you while she was alive." Emma took the letter with trembling hands, staring at her name written in handwriting she had never seen but somehow recognized. "She wrote this before she died?" She gave it to her best friend Elizabeth, with instructions to give it to you if anything ever happened to her. Jessica knew she was taking a risk by trying to contact you, but she felt you deserved to know the truth about your heritage. Emma carefully opened the envelope and unfolded several pages of Jessica's neat handwriting. As she began to read, tears welled up in her eyes. "My dearest Emma," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then something has happened to me. And the secret I've carried for 20 years is about to come to light. I want you to know that giving you up was the hardest decision I've ever made, but also the most important. Every day since you were born, I have thought about you, wondered about you, and loved you with every fiber of my being." Emma's voice broke as she continued reading aloud. "I hope that Robert and Linda Parker have given you the love and stability that I could never provide. I chose them carefully after months of interviews and background checks because I knew they would raise you to be the remarkable young woman I always dreamed you would become." Daniel and Rivera listened in silence as Emma read her mother's words, understanding for the first time the depth of Jessica's sacrifice and the courage it had taken for her to make contact with her daughter after 20 years of separation. "I need to tell you about your father," the letter continued, "not because I want to burden you with this knowledge, but because you have a right to know where you come from. Your father is a powerful man who has built his career on lies and moral hypocrisy. When I told him I was pregnant, he offered me money to make the problem go away. When I refused, he threatened to destroy everyone I cared about." Emma wiped tears from her eyes as she read the detailed account of Jessica's relationship with Morrison and the aftermath of his rejection. The letter painted a picture of a young woman faced with an impossible choice: expose the truth and risk everything, or sacrifice her own happiness to protect the people she loved. "For 20 years, I have honored the agreement I made with your father," the letter continued. "I have kept his secret, raised no claims against him, and allowed him to build his political career without interference. But you are no longer a child who needs protection from the truth. You are a strong, intelligent woman who deserves to know her heritage and make her own choices about what to do with that knowledge." Emma looked up at Daniel, her eyes red with tears but filled with determination. She was planning to expose him. Daniel nodded. "Jessica hired a private investigator to find you. When she finally made contact and started building a relationship with you, she decided that Morrison's secret had been kept long enough. She was going to go public with his identity as your father, and that's when she was killed. We believe. So, Morrison couldn't afford to have his secret exposed, especially with his presidential ambitions. Jessica's murder was made to look like a random crime, but we now know it was a carefully orchestrated assassination." Emma folded the letter carefully and held it against her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt truly connected to her biological mother, not as an abstract concept, but as a real person who had loved her enough to die for her. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Detective Rivera leaned forward in her chair. "That depends on what you want to do, Emma. We have enough evidence to reopen your mother's case and possibly bring charges against the people who killed her. But pursuing this investigation will put you in significant danger. Morrison has too much to lose to let this go quietly. On the other hand," Daniel added, "you could choose to walk away. Change your name, relocate somewhere safe, and live your life without ever confronting Morrison or seeking justice for Jessica. It wouldn't be fair, but it would be safe." Emma stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street where children were riding bicycles and neighbors were tending their gardens. It was a normal scene from a normal world, but she knew that her life would never be normal again. "Tell me about her," she said finally. "Tell me about Jessica. I want to know everything." Over the next several hours, Daniel and Elizabeth Warren, who had joined them at the safe house, shared stories about Jessica that brought her to life in Emma's imagination. They told her about Jessica's passion for teaching, her love of art and literature, her infectious laugh that could fill a room with joy. They described her volunteer work at animal shelters, her tendency to take in stray cats, and her habit of buying extra groceries to give to homeless people she encountered on the street. Jessica was the kindest person I've ever known, Elizabeth sighed, her eyes soft with memory. She saw the best in everyone and never hesitated to help people who needed it. When we were in college, she used to tutor struggling students for free, even when she could barely afford her own textbooks. Daniel smiled as he remembered his sister's generous spirit. Jessica once gave her winter coat to a homeless woman. We passed on the street, even though it was the middle of December and she didn't have money to buy another one. She said she could be cold for a few weeks, but the woman didn't have any other options. Emma listened to these stories with a mixture of joy and grief, finally understanding the woman who had given birth to her and then sacrificed everything to protect her. She could see herself in some of Jessica's traits, the desire to help others, the stubborn streak that emerged when fighting for what was right, the tendency to see the world in terms of justice and fairness rather than personal advantage. "She sounds amazing," Emma said softly. "I wish I could have known her." "You can still know her," Daniel replied. "Her spirit, her values, her sense of right and wrong, they're all part of you. I can see it in the way you carry yourself, the way you think about problems, even the way you tilt your head when you're processing difficult information. You're Jessica's daughter in every way that matters." As the evening wore on, Emma found herself growing more comfortable with Daniel. Despite the surreal circumstances of their meeting, there was something about him that felt familiar, a sense of connection that went beyond their shared DNA. She could see Jessica in his features, but also something uniquely his own, a strength and determination that had built a business empire. From nothing, what was it like growing up with her? Emma asked. Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "Jessica was my best friend, my confidant, my conscience. We were twins, but she was born 3 minutes before me, and she never let me forget it. She was always the one looking out for me, making sure I didn't take myself too seriously or lose sight of what was really important." He paused, lost in memory. "When our parents died in a car accident when we were 16, Jessica was the one who held our family together. She made sure we both graduated high school, applied to colleges, and didn't give up on our dreams despite the tragedy. I don't know what would have happened to me without her." Emma felt a pang of loss for the relationship she had never had the chance to experience. "What happened after high school?" "When she got pregnant with me." Daniel's expression darkened. "That's when everything changed. Jessica had always planned to go to college and become a teacher, but she needed to work that summer to save money for tuition. She took the internship in Portland because it paid well and gave her experience in the professional world. She was so excited about the opportunity. But then she met Morrison. Morrison was everything an 18-year-old girl would find irresistible," Elizabeth added. "He was older, sophisticated, successful. He made Jessica feel special, like she was the most important person in his world. She fell for him completely." Daniel clenched his fists as he continued the story. "When Jessica came home at the end of the summer, I knew something was different. She was quieter, more withdrawn. She claimed she was just tired from working, but I could tell there was something else. Then she started making excuses not to apply to colleges, saying she wanted to take a gap year and figure out what she really wanted to do. She was hiding the pregnancy," Emma realized. "She was terrified," Elizabeth confirmed. "Jessica had always been the responsible one, the good girl who never got into trouble. The idea of being an unwed teenage mother in a small town was overwhelming enough, but knowing that the father was a married man who had threatened her made it even worse." Emma tried to imagine her mother at 18, facing such an impossible situation with no support system and no good options. How did she manage to hide it for so long? Jessica told everyone she was taking a job in Seattle and wouldn't be home much, Daniel explained. She found a boarding house for unwed mothers and worked at a diner to pay for her room and board. I thought she was just being independent, striking out on her own. If I had known the truth, what would you have done? Daniel's voice was fierce with protective anger. I would have confronted Morrison. I would have made sure he took responsibility for what he had done. I would have supported Jessica and helped her raise you, no matter what it cost us. And that's exactly why she didn't tell you, Elizabeth said gently. Jessica knew that. You would try to fight Morrison, and she also knew that he had the power to destroy both of you. She was protecting you just as much as she was protecting Emma. As the night wore on, Emma found herself asking dozens of questions about her mother's life, desperate to fill in the gaps that 20 years of separation had created. She learned that Jessica had kept a journal throughout her pregnancy, documenting her thoughts and feelings about the daughter she was carrying but would never raise. She discovered that Jessica had chosen the name Emma because it meant universal or whole, hoping that her daughter would grow up to be complete and fulfilled despite the circumstances of her birth. She picked your adoptive parents very carefully. Daniel told her. Jessica spent months interviewing couples, running background checks, making sure they were the kind of people who would give you the love and stability she couldn't provide. Robert and Linda Parker weren't chosen randomly. They were selected because Jessica believed they would be perfect parents for you. Emma felt a surge of gratitude for the woman who had made such a difficult decision with such care and thoughtfulness. Did she ever try to contact me before last year? Elizabeth shook her head. Jessica made a promise to your adoptive parents that she wouldn't interfere in your upbringing. She honored that promise even though it broke her heart. But she did keep track of you from a distance. She knew when you started school, when you made honor roll, when you got into college. She was so proud of everything you accomplished. How did she know all that? She hired private investigators to do welfare checks, Daniel explained. Nothing intrusive, just enough to make sure you were safe and happy. Jessica needed to know that the sacrifice she had made was worth it, that you were thriving with the Parkers. Emma felt overwhelmed by the depth of her mother's love and sacrifice. Jessica had given up everything, her relationship with her daughter, her dreams of a normal family, even her life, to protect Emma from the consequences of Morrison's actions. I want to do something, Emma said suddenly. I want to make sure Morrison pays for what he did to her. Daniel and Detective Rivera exchanged glances. This was the moment they had been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. Emma's decision would determine not just her own fate, but the course of an investigation that could bring down one of the most powerful men in America. Emma, Rivera said carefully, I need you to understand what you're asking for. Going after Morrison isn't just dangerous, it's potentially fatal. He's already killed your mother and at least 2 other people to protect this secret. He won't hesitate to kill you too. But you'll protect me, right? Emma looked back and forth between Daniel and Rivera. You have resources, connections, security teams. Surely there's a way to expose him safely. Daniel leaned forward, his expression serious. Emma, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And I've already hired the best security firm in the country to protect you. But Morrison has something more powerful than money. He has government connections, intelligence resources, and the ability to make people disappear without leaving a trace. Money can't always protect you from that kind of power. Emma stood up and began pacing again, her mind working through the implications of what she was facing. So what are my options? Spend the rest of my life in hiding, looking over my shoulder, wondering if today is the day Morrison decides I'm too much of a threat. Or fight back and risk everything to get justice for my mother. There is a third option, Rivera said quietly. We could work together to build a case against Morrison that's so airtight, so public, and so well documented that he couldn't silence it even if he wanted to. But it would require patience, careful planning, and absolute discretion. One mistake could get all of us killed. Emma stopped pacing and looked out the window again. The suburban street was quiet now, lit only by streetlights and the occasional glow from a television in someone's living room. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that in this unremarkable house, decisions were being made that could change the course of American politics. What would it involve? She asked. Rivera pulled out a legal pad and began outlining a plan that had been forming in her mind since the investigation began. We start by building an alliance with other people who have been harmed by Morrison's actions. Your mother can't be the only person he's threatened or silenced over the years. Politicians like Morrison don't get to where they are without leaving a trail of victims. We also need to document everything, Daniel added. Every threat, every piece of evidence, every connection between Morrison and the people who killed Jessica. We need to build a case that's so comprehensive that no amount of political influence can make it disappear. Emma felt a spark of hope for the first time since this nightmare had begun. You think it's possible? To actually bring him down? I think your mother believed it was possible, Rivera replied. Otherwise, she wouldn't have risked her life trying to expose him. Jessica died believing that the truth would eventually come to light and that justice would be served. The question is whether we're brave enough to finish what she started. Emma looked at the letter from her mother, still clutched in her hands, and made her decision. I want to do it. I want to expose Morrison and get justice for Jessica. Whatever it takes. Daniel felt a surge of pride and terror in equal measure. Emma's determination reminded him so strongly of Jessica that it was almost painful to witness. But he also knew that this decision would put her in more danger than she could possibly imagine. All right, he said finally. But we do this my way. Professional security, safe houses, careful planning, and no unnecessary risks. I'm not losing another member of my family to Morrison's ambition. Emma nodded, feeling a sense of purpose that she had never experienced before. For 20 years, she had wondered about her biological family and her place in the world. Now she knew exactly who she was and what she was meant to do. She was Jessica Cross's daughter, and she was going to finish the fight that her mother had started. But as they began planning their campaign against one of the most powerful men in America, none of them could have imagined the deadly game of cat and mouse they were about to enter. Morrison had spent 20 years covering his tracks and eliminating threats. He wasn't going to give up without a fight, and the price of that fight would be higher than any of them could anticipate. The war for justice was about to begin, and Emma was no longer just a victim seeking answers. She was a weapon pointed directly at the heart of Morrison's carefully constructed empire of lies. The only question was whether she would live long enough to pull the trigger. 3 weeks had passed since Emma's world had been turned upside down, and the safe house had become both her sanctuary and her prison. She had spent countless hours poring over documents, photographs, and witness statements that Detective Rivera and Daniel's team of investigators had compiled. The evidence against Senator Morrison was damning but circumstantial, built on connections and coincidences that a skilled defense attorney could easily dismiss as speculation. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open to a news article about Morrison's latest campaign appearance. The headline read, "Senator Morrison announces presidential bid with Family Values Platform," and the accompanying photograph showed him surrounded by his wife and 3 legitimate children, all smiling for the cameras. The irony wasn't lost on Emma that the man who had threatened to destroy her mother's life was now running for the highest office in the land on a platform of moral leadership and family integrity. He looks so normal, Emma murmured, studying Morrison's face for any resemblance to her own features. She could see it now that she knew what to look for: the same stubborn jawline, the same intelligent eyes, the same way of tilting his head when he was thinking. It was unsettling to recognize parts of herself in a man she had come to despise. Daniel entered the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee, setting one in front of Emma before taking the seat across from her. "Rivera called this morning," Catherine Wells is finally talking. Emma looked up from the laptop, hope flickering in her eyes. What did she say? She's admitted to being hired to intimidate you, but she's claiming she was just supposed to. Scare you into backing off, not actually hurt you. She says she was hired through intermediaries and never had direct contact with Morrison himself. Emma's shoulders sagged with disappointment. So we still can't connect him directly to the Fayouga. Threats? Not yet. But Wells gave us the name of the security firm that hired her, Blackwater Solutions. They specialize in what they call reputation management for high-profile clients. Emma had never heard of Blackwater Solutions, but the name sent a chill down her spine. What kind of reputation management? The kind that involves making problems disappear, Daniel replied grimly. Rivera's team is getting a warrant to search their offices, but I'm not optimistic about what they'll find. These people are professionals at covering their tracks. Emma closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair, frustration evident in every line of her body. Daniel, we've been at this for weeks, and what do we have to show for it? A hired thug who admits to threatening me, but can't connect Morrison to the order. A private security firm that probably destroys its records on a regular basis. And a 20-year-old murder case that everyone except us believes was solved. Daniel could hear the discouragement in his niece's voice, and it reminded him painfully of Jessica during her darkest moments. Emma, I know this is frustrating, but building a case against someone like Morrison takes time. We're not just fighting one man, we're fighting an entire system that's designed to protect people like him. Maybe that's the problem, Emma said, standing up and beginning to pace the small kitchen. Maybe we're playing by rules that Morrison wrote. Maybe we need to think outside the box. Daniel felt a flash of alarm at the determined look in Emma's eyes. He had seen that same expression on Jessica's face in the weeks before her death, and it had preceded some very dangerous decisions. Emma, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that Morrison is about to announce his presidential campaign. That means he's going to be making public appearances, giving speeches, meeting with voters. What if we confronted him directly? In public, where he can't have us killed without witnesses. Daniel shook his head immediately. Absolutely not. Emma, that's exactly the kind of reckless move that got Jessica killed. Morrison didn't become one of the most powerful men in America by being unprepared for confrontations. He'll have security, legal teams, and damage control specialists ready to handle any situation. But what if we're not trying to damage his reputation? Emma continued, her mind racing with possibilities. What if we're trying to get him to make a mistake? To say something or do something that incriminates him? Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Detective Rivera's name, and Daniel answered immediately. Rivera, what's the situation? We have a problem. Rivera's voice was tense. Blackwater Solutions offices were cleaned out sometime last night. Empty servers, shredded documents, no trace of any records going back more than a month. Someone tipped them off about the warrant. Daniel's blood ran cold. How is that possible? Who knew about the warrant besides your team? That's what we're trying to figure out. But Daniel, there's something else. We found Robert Chen's files. Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. Robert Chen was the private investigator who had helped Jessica find Emma, the man who had supposedly committed suicide 2 weeks after Jessica's murder. Where did you find them? Hidden in a storage unit that Chen had rented under a false name. His assistant found the key in his desk drawer and finally decided to come forward. Daniel, Chen didn't commit suicide. He was murdered, and he knew it was coming. Emma had stopped pacing and was watching Daniel intently, trying to read his expression. The color had drained from his face, and she could see the muscles in his jaw working as he processed whatever Rivera was telling him. What did the files contain? Daniel asked. Everything. Chen had documented his entire investigation into Emma's adoption, including photographs, DNA test results, and recorded phone conversations with Jessica. But more importantly, he had evidence of Morrison's attempts to stop the investigation. What kind of evidence? Phone records showing calls from Morrison's office to Chen's business line. Bank records showing large deposits into Chen's account followed by immediate withdrawals, classic signs of attempted bribery. And Daniel. There's a recording. Daniel's heart stopped. A recording of what? Morrison threatening Chen directly. It's not clear, and Morrison never says his own name, but the voice analysis is conclusive. It's definitely him. Emma couldn't stand the suspense any longer. Daniel, what's happening? What did they find? Daniel held up a hand to indicate. He needed to finish the call. Rivera, where is this evidence now? Secured in police custody with multiple copies in separate locations. Morrison can't make this disappear even if he wanted to. But Daniel, you need to understand what this means. Chen's files prove that Morrison knew about Jessica's investigation and took active steps to stop it. This is the smoking gun we've been looking for. Daniel felt a surge of hope and terror in equal measure. Does this mean we can arrest Morrison? It means we can bring charges. Whether they'll stick depends on a lot of factors, but we finally have enough evidence to force a trial. The question is whether Morrison will try to eliminate the remaining witnesses before we can get him into custody. After Daniel hung up, he turned to face Emma, who was practically vibrating with anticipation. Tell me, she demanded. Daniel explained about Chen's files and the recorded evidence of Morrison's direct involvement in covering up the investigation. Emma listened with growing excitement, but Daniel could also see the wheels turning in her mind, and he didn't like the direction her thoughts were heading. This is it, Emma said. This is what we needed to bring him down. Emma, Rivera is right about one thing. Morrison is going to be desperate now. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Morrison has the resources to strike back hard and fast, which is exactly why we need to move quickly, Emma replied. Before he has time to eliminate the evidence or the witnesses. Daniel studied his niece's face, seeing the same determination that had driven Jessica to her death. What are you planning, Emma? Morrison is holding a campaign rally tomorrow night at the Washington State Convention Center. 5,000 people, live television coverage, maximum security. It's the perfect opportunity. The perfect opportunity for what? Emma walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street, her mind made up. To end this once and for all. To confront Morrison publicly and force him to admit what he did to Jessica. Daniel felt his blood pressure spike. Emma, that's suicide. Morrison's security team will have that venue locked down tighter than Fort Knox. You'll never get within 100 yards of him. Not as Emma Parker, college student. But what if I went as someone else? Someone with legitimate access to the event? What are you talking about? Emma turned back to face him, her eyes bright with dangerous inspiration. I'm talking about using my connection to Morrison. I'm his daughter, Daniel, his biological daughter. I have a right to be at his campaign announcement. Daniel's face went white. Emma, you can't be serious. Think about it. Morrison has spent 20 years denying my existence, but he can't deny DNA evidence. If I show up at his rally claiming to be his daughter, he'll have to deal with me publicly. He can't have me killed in front of 5,000 witnesses and live television. Cameras. He doesn't have to kill you publicly, Daniel pointed out. He just has to discredit you, have you removed by security, and then deal with you later when there are no cameras around. Emma shook her head. Not if we do this right. Not if we make sure the whole world knows who I am before I ever set foot in that convention center. Before Daniel could respond, Emma's phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and frowned. It's an unknown number. Don't answer it, Daniel said immediately. But Emma was already swiping to accept the call. Hello? Emma Parker. The voice. was deep, cultured, and somehow familiar despite the fact that Emma was certain she had never heard it before. "Who is this? I think you know who this is. And I think it's time we had a conversation." Emma's blood ran cold as she realized she was speaking to Senator Morrison himself. She looked at Daniel, who was already signaling for her to keep him talking while he contacted Rivera. "What do you want?" Emma asked. "I want to discuss our mutual problem like civilized adults. You have something that belongs to me, and I have information that you need. Perhaps we can reach an arrangement that benefits us both. I don't have anything that belongs to you." Morrison's laugh was cold and calculating. "My dear child, you have my DNA, my genetic legacy, and the potential to destroy everything I've worked for over the past 20 years. I'd say that makes you very much my property." Emma felt a surge of revulsion at Morrison's words. "I'm not your property. I'm not your anything. You're my daughter, whether either of us likes it or not. And daughters, Emma, should respect their fathers. Your mother never learned that lesson, which is why she had to be taught it in such an unfortunate manner." The casual admission of responsibility for Jessica's murder hit Emma like a physical blow. Morrison wasn't just acknowledging his role in her mother's death. He was threatening Emma with the same fate. "You killed her," Emma whispered. "I did what was necessary to protect my family and my career. Jessica could have lived a long, happy life if she had simply honored our agreement. But she chose to break her word, and choices have consequences." Daniel was frantically typing on his phone, sending messages to Rivera and the security team. But Emma was too focused on Morrison's voice to pay attention to anything else. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I want you to make the same choice your mother should have made 20 years ago. I want you to disappear, Emma. Permanently. Leave Seattle, change your name, never speak of our connection again. In return, I'll ensure that you're well compensated for your discretion. And if I refuse, then you'll end up exactly like your mother. The only difference is that this time, I won't make it look like a random crime. This time, everyone will know that you were eliminated because you threatened national security." Emma felt her anger overriding her fear. National security? How does covering up your affair threaten national security? "Because I'm going to be the next president of the United States, Emma, and presidents can't afford to have illegitimate children running around, making demands and creating scandals. The American people deserve a leader they can trust, not someone whose past is riddled with indiscretions. The American people deserve to know what kind of man they're voting for. The American people deserve strong leadership, and that's exactly what I intend to give them, with or without your cooperation." Emma looked at Daniel, who was holding up his phone to show that Rivera was already tracing the call. But Emma could hear the finality in Morrison's tone, and she knew that this conversation was building toward ultimatum. "You have 24 hours to make your decision," Morrison continued. "Disappear quietly, and you'll live comfortably for the rest of your life. Continue this foolish crusade, and you'll join your mother in whatever afterlife she's found herself in." "I have a better idea," Emma said, surprising both Morrison and Daniel with the steel in her voice. "Why don't you withdraw from the presidential race and turn yourself in for Jessica's murder? Save everyone the trouble of a long, messy investigation." Morrison's laugh was genuinely amused. "My dear child, you really are your mother's daughter. The same naive idealism, the same self-destructive stubbornness. I had hoped you might be smarter than Jessica, but I can see that genetics are a powerful force. I'm smart enough to know that you're not as untouchable as you think you are. The police have evidence, Morrison. They have recordings of your voice threatening the private investigator who helped Jessica find me. They have financial records, witness statements, and enough circumstantial evidence to put you in prison for the rest of your life." There was a long pause before Morrison spoke again, and when he did, his voice had lost its casual confidence. "Evidence can be discredited, Emma. Witnesses can be bought or silenced. and recordings can be explained away by clever lawyers. I've been playing this game for longer than you've been alive. Maybe, but I'm not playing games anymore. What's that supposed to mean? Emma made a decision that terrified Daniel, even as it filled him with pride. It means I'm going to be at your campaign rally tomorrow night. I'm going to stand up in front of 5,000 people and live television cameras, and I'm going to tell the world exactly who I am and what you did to my mother. Morrison's voice turned deadly quiet. Emma, if you show up at that rally, you'll be dead before you can say a single word. We'll see about that. Emma hung up the phone and turned to face Daniel, who was staring at her with a mixture of admiration and terror. Emma, you can't be serious about going to that rally. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. It's suicide. Morrison just threatened to kill you on a recorded phone line. He's not going to hesitate to follow through on that threat. Emma walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the setting sun, her mind already working through the logistics of what she was planning. Daniel, my mother spent 20 years living in fear, hiding the truth, protecting a man who didn't deserve her silence. I'm not going to make the same mistake. Jessica wasn't making a mistake, Daniel protested. She was trying to protect you. And now it's my turn to protect other people. How many other women has Morrison threatened or silenced over the years? How many other secrets is he hiding? If I don't stop him now, he'll become president, and then he'll be truly untouchable. Daniel moved to stand beside her at the window, his mind racing through all the ways this plan could go wrong. Emma, even if you manage to confront Morrison publicly, what makes you think anyone will believe you? He'll claim you're a delusional woman seeking attention. He'll have DNA tests that prove nothing because he'll refuse to provide a sample. And even if you have evidence, he'll discredit it. Maybe, Emma admitted, but I'll have said it. The truth will be out there, on record, for everyone to hear. And Morrison will know that I'm not afraid of him anymore. And then he'll kill you. Emma turned to look at her uncle, seeing the fear and love in his eyes. Daniel, I appreciate everything you've done for me. I know you're trying to protect me just like Jessica tried to protect me. But I can't live my whole life running from Morrison's threats. You won't have to. Rivera said they have enough evidence to bring charges. Let the justice system handle this. Emma shook her head. The justice system protects people like Morrison. He has connections, influence, and unlimited resources to fight any charges. The only way to truly stop him is to expose him so publicly and so dramatically that he can't recover. Daniel studied his niece's face, seeing the same determined set to her jaw that had characterized Jessica in her final weeks. He realized that nothing he could say would change Emma's mind, and that trying to stop her would only drive her to act alone without backup or protection. All right, he said finally. If you're determined to do this, then we're going to do it right. Professional security, backup plans, and enough evidence to bury Morrison even if something happens to you. Emma felt a surge of gratitude and relief. You'll help me? I'll do everything in my power to keep you alive long enough to expose that bastard. But Emma, you need to understand that this is a one-way trip. Once you confront Morrison publicly, there's no going back to your old life. You'll be a target for as long as he's alive. I understand. Daniel pulled out his phone and began making calls to his security team, Detective Rivera, and a half-dozen other contacts who owed him favors. If Emma was determined to walk into the lion's den, he was going to make sure she had every possible advantage. But as he coordinated the logistics of what could only be described as a suicide mission, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that history was repeating itself. 20 years ago, Jessica had made a similar decision to confront Morrison, and it had cost her everything. Now Emma was making the same choice, driven by the same sense of justice and moral obligation. The only question was whether this time the outcome would be different. Whether Emma's courage would be enough to bring down a man who had spent decades perfecting the art of making his problems disappear. Tomorrow night, at the Washington State Convention Center, that question would finally be answered. And the fate of Morrison's presidential ambitions, Emma's life, and the legacy of Jessica Cross would all hang in the balance. The Washington State Convention Center hummed with electric anticipation as 5,000 supporters packed into the main hall. Red, white, and blue banners hung from the rafters, and television crews positioned their cameras for optimal coverage of what was being billed as the most important political announcement of the year. Senator James Morrison stood backstage, adjusting his tie and running through his speech one final time, unaware that his carefully orchestrated political future was about to collide with the past he thought he had buried forever. Emma Parker sat in a rental car 3 blocks away, her hands trembling as she stared at the convention center through the windshield. She wore a simple black dress and carried a small purse containing the letter from Jessica, copies of the DNA evidence, and a voice recorder that would capture everything about to unfold. Daniel sat beside her, his face etched with worry and determination in equal measure. "The security team is in position," Daniel said, checking his phone for the latest updates from his protection detail. "Rivera has plainclothes officers throughout the venue, and we have backup plans if things go sideways." Emma nodded, though her mind felt disconnected from her body. "What if he doesn't let me speak? What if security removes me before I can say anything? Then we have contingency plans. The recording equipment will capture any attempt to silence you, and Rivera's team will intervene if Morrison tries anything illegal." Daniel reached over and squeezed her hand. "Emma, you don't have to do this. We can still walk away." Emma looked at her uncle, seeing Jessica's features reflected in his concerned expression. "No, this ends tonight." 20 minutes later, Emma walked through the metal detectors at the convention center entrance, her credentials identifying her as a freelance journalist from a small Seattle newspaper. Daniel had used his connections to secure the press pass, giving Emma legitimate access to the event and positioning her in the media section, where she would have a clear view of Morrison's podium. The crowd was energetic and optimistic, filled with supporters who believed they were witnessing the launch of the next presidential administration. Emma moved through the throng, noting the heavy security presence and the careful positioning of Morrison's advance team. Everything was choreographed to perfection, designed to project strength and inevitability. As Emma took her seat in the press section, she spotted Detective Rivera near the back of the hall, dressed as a campaign volunteer but clearly scanning the crowd for potential threats. Their eyes met briefly, and Rivera gave an almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. At exactly 8 o'clock, the lights dimmed and dramatic music filled the convention center. Morrison emerged from backstage to thunderous applause, his family trailing behind him in a picture-perfect display of American political dynasty. Emma studied his face as he waved to the crowd, searching for any sign of the man who had threatened her life less than 24 hours earlier. Morrison began his speech with the usual political platitudes about hope, change, and returning America to its founding principles. He spoke passionately about family values, moral leadership, and the importance of integrity in public service. Emma felt sick listening to his hypocritical rhetoric, knowing what lay beneath his carefully crafted public persona. "My fellow Americans," Morrison declared, his voice carrying across the packed hall, "we stand at a crossroads in our nation's history. We can choose to continue down the path of corruption and moral decay, or we can elect leaders who understand that character matters, that family matters, that truth matters." Emma stood up slowly, her legs feeling weak but her resolve absolute. Several people in the press section looked at her curiously as she moved toward the aisle, but security hadn't yet noticed her departure from the designated media area. Morrison continued his speech, building toward his official announcement of candidacy. "I have devoted my life to public service because I believe in the fundamental goodness of the American people. I believe in the strength of the American family. And I believe that we deserve leaders who live by the same moral standards they expect from others. Emma reached the edge of the crowd surrounding the stage, close enough now that Morrison would be able to see her clearly. She waited for a pause in his speech, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone around her could hear it. "That is why," Morrison continued, "with my beloved wife Margaret and our 3 wonderful children by my side, I am proud to announce my candidacy for President of the United States." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but Emma's voice cut through the celebration like a knife. "Senator Morrison," she called out, loud enough for the microphones to pick up her words. "What about your 4th child?" The effect was immediate and dramatic. Morrison's triumphant smile faltered as his eyes found Emma in the crowd. The applause began to die down as people turned to see who was shouting from the audience. Television. Cameras swiveled to capture the disruption. "What about the daughter you abandoned?" Emma shouted, pushing closer to the stage despite attempts by security to intercept her. "What about Jessica Cross, the woman you had murdered to keep your secret?" Morrison's face went white, but he recovered quickly, signaling to his security team while maintaining his public composure. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we have a disturbed individual in the audience. Security will handle this situation." But Emma was already moving, using the confusion and Daniel's careful planning to evade the first wave of security personnel. "My name is Emma Parker," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system as she activated the small transmitter Daniel had given her. "I am the biological daughter of Senator James Morrison and Jessica Cross, who was murdered 20 years ago to protect his political career." The convention center fell into stunned silence. Morrison stood frozen at his podium, calculating his options while television cameras captured every second of the unfolding drama. His wife Margaret looked confused and horrified, while his legitimate children stared at Emma with a mixture of shock and curiosity. "This woman is clearly mentally unstable," Morrison said into his microphone, trying to regain control of the situation. "She's making wild accusations that have no basis in reality." Emma pulled out the DNA test results and held them high above her head. "I have proof. DNA evidence that shows James Morrison is my biological father." She turned to address the television cameras directly. 20 years ago, Morrison had an affair with an 18-year-old intern named Jessica Cross. When she became pregnant, he threatened to destroy her life if she ever revealed his identity. Security guards were closing in on Emma from multiple directions, but Detective Rivera and her team were also moving through the crowd, ready to intervene if Morrison's people tried to silence Emma permanently. "Jessica gave me up for adoption to protect me from Morrison's threats," Emma continued, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "But when I turned 20 and started looking for my biological parents, Jessica decided it was time to tell the truth. That decision cost her her life." Morrison abandoned his podium and strode toward Emma, his political mask finally slipping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. "Enough!" he shouted. "Remove this woman immediately." But Emma wasn't finished. Jessica Cross was murdered in her apartment on October 15, 2004, by a man named Marcus Webb, who was hired by Morrison to silence her permanently. Webb is currently in police custody and has confessed to the murder. The crowd was in complete upheaval now, with some people shouting in support of Emma, while others demanded she be removed. Morrison's campaign staff scrambled to damage control mode, but the story was already being broadcast live across the country. "These are desperate lies from a deranged woman seeking attention," Morrison declared, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "I have never seen this person before in my life, and I categorically deny these baseless accusations." Emma pulled out Jessica's letter and began reading from it. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and the secret I've carried for 20 years is about to come to light. Your father is Senator James Morrison, a man who threatened to destroy everyone I loved if I ever revealed his identity." Morrison's face contorted with rage as he realized Emma was reading from Jessica's final letter. "That document is fabricated. This entire performance is a calculated political attack designed to damage my campaign." But Detective Rivera was already moving through the crowd, her badge visible as she approached the stage. "Senator Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Jessica Cross." The convention center erupted into complete chaos. Morrison's security team didn't know whether to protect him from arrest or comply with law enforcement. Television reporters were frantically updating their coverage as the biggest political scandal in decades unfolded live on national television. Morrison backed away from Detective Rivera, his eyes wild with desperation. "This is a setup. These people are working together to destroy my campaign." "Senator, you have the right to remain silent," Rivera continued, undeterred by Morrison's protests. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Emma watched as the man who had terrorized her mother and threatened her own life was finally held accountable for his crimes. 20 years of secrets and lies were crashing down around Morrison in the most public way possible. But Morrison wasn't finished fighting. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled at Emma as handcuffs were placed on his wrists. "I have connections, resources, influence that extends far beyond anything you can imagine. This isn't over." Emma stepped closer to Morrison, no longer afraid of the man who had loomed over her family like a dark shadow for 2 decades. "You're right, Senator. This isn't over. It's just beginning. Every secret you've buried, every person you've threatened, every crime you've committed is going to come to light. Jessica's death was just the beginning of your downfall." As Morrison was led away in handcuffs, the crowd began to disperse in confusion and shock. The carefully orchestrated campaign lodge had become a crime scene, and Morrison's presidential ambitions lay in ruins along with his reputation. Daniel appeared at Emma's side, pulling her into a protective embrace as they watched Morrison disappear into a police vehicle, surrounded by flashing lights and television cameras. "It's over," Emma whispered, feeling a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. "No," Daniel replied, holding her tightly. "It's just beginning. You've started something that's going to change everything." In the days that followed, Emma's confrontation with Morrison became the most watched political moment of the decade. The story dominated news cycles across the country as journalists dug deeper into Morrison's past, uncovering a pattern of threats, bribes, and cover-ups that stretched back to the beginning of his political career. Emma found herself at the center of a media firestorm, but with Daniel's support and Detective Rivera's protection, she navigated the attention with grace and determination. She testified before a grand jury, provided evidence to federal investigators, and slowly began to rebuild her life around the truth rather than the lies that had defined her existence. 6 months later, Emma stood in a cemetery overlooking Seattle, placing fresh flowers on a headstone that read, "Jessica Cross, beloved sister, teacher, and mother." Daniel stood beside her, along with Tommy, who had flown in from San Francisco to meet his newly discovered cousin. "Do you think she would be proud?" Emma asked, looking down at her mother's grave. Daniel smiled, seeing so much of Jessica in Emma's quiet strength and unwavering moral compass. "I think she would be amazed by your courage. Jessica died trying to protect you, but you lived to protect everyone else Morrison might have hurt." Emma nodded, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded her for most of her life. She had found her family, learned the truth about her past, and ensured that justice was finally served. Morrison's trial was still months away, but his political career was finished, and other victims were coming forward with their own stories of his abuse of power. As they walked away from the cemetery together, Emma realized that her journey was far from over. She had decided to change her major to criminal justice, inspired by Detective Rivera's example and determined to help other families find the truth about their own buried secrets. Daniel had offered her a position at his company, but Emma wanted to forge her own path, just as Jessica had tried to do 20 years earlier. The legacy of Jessica Cross lived on in her daughter's determination to fight for justice, in Daniel's renewed commitment to family over fortune, and in the countless victims who would no longer have to suffer in silence because one young woman had found the courage to speak truth to power. Emma Parker was no longer a confused college student searching for her identity. She was Jessica Cross's daughter, Daniel Cross's niece, and a force for justice in her own right. The past that had been hidden for 20 years was now public knowledge, and the future stretched ahead filled with possibilities that her mother could never have imagined. Senator Morrison's empire of lies had crumbled in a single night, brought down by the very person he had tried so hard to erase. Justice, it turned out, was not just about punishment or revenge. It was about truth, family, and the courage to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. As Emma began her new life surrounded by the family she had never known she had, she carried with her the memory of a mother who had loved her enough to die for her, and the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption and lies was simply telling the truth. 1 year later, Emma Cross stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Daniel's office, watching the Seattle skyline glisten in the morning sunlight. The city looked different to her now, not just because of everything that had happened, but because she finally knew her place in it. She was no longer Emma Parker, the adopted college student searching for her identity. She was Emma Cross, daughter of Jessica Cross and Senator James Morrison, niece of Daniel Cross, and survivor of a conspiracy that had shaken the foundations of American politics. The trial had ended 3 weeks ago with Morrison's conviction on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and racketeering. He had been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a fitting end for a man who had spent decades destroying lives to protect his own ambitions. The conviction had sent shockwaves through Washington, triggering investigations into dozens of other politicians and their connections to similar cover-up operations. Emma had testified for 6 grueling days, facing Morrison's high-powered legal team and their attempts to discredit her story. But the evidence had been overwhelming, and Marcus Webb's testimony from prison had corroborated every detail of the conspiracy. Morrison's empire of corruption had crumbled completely, taking down several other politicians and business leaders who had been complicit in his crimes. "The Seattle Times wants to do a follow-up interview," Daniel said, entering his office with a steaming cup of coffee and a stack of newspapers. "They're calling you the woman who single-handedly brought down the most corrupt political machine in Washington state history." Emma turned from the window with a wry smile. "I didn't do it single-handedly. I had help from a certain billionaire uncle and a very determined detective." Daniel set the newspapers on his desk, the headlines still focusing on the aftermath of Morrison's conviction. "Rivera got promoted to chief detective, by the way. She's being transferred to a new federal task force investigating political corruption. She deserves it. None of this would have been possible without her willingness to reopen Jessica's case." Emma walked to Daniel's desk and picked up one of the newspapers, scanning an article about Morrison's sentencing. His wife had filed for divorce immediately after his arrest, and his 3 legitimate children had changed their names and moved to different states to escape the scandal. Emma felt sorry for them, knowing they were innocent victims of their father's crimes, but she also understood their need to distance themselves from the Morrison legacy. "Have you decided what you want to do about your name?" Daniel asked. "Legally, you're still Emma Parker, but—" "I've been thinking about that," Emma replied. "I want to honor both families. The Parkers raised me and loved me for 20 years. They didn't deserve to be dragged into this mess, but they've been incredibly supportive throughout everything." And Jessica deserves to have her daughter carry on the cross name. Daniel nodded approvingly. What are you thinking? Emma Cross Parker. It acknowledges both my biological heritage and the family that shaped me into who I am today. I think Jessica would love that, Daniel said softly. She always believed that family wasn't just about blood relations, but about the people who choose to love and support each other. Emma set down the newspaper and walked to a photograph on Daniel's desk showing him with an 8-year-old boy. Tommy had become a regular presence in Emma's life over the past year, and she had discovered the joy of being an older cousin to someone who looked up to her with uncomplicated admiration. How is Tommy adjusting to having a famous cousin? Emma asked. He tells everyone at school that his cousin is a superhero who fights bad guys, Daniel laughed. Last week he asked me if you could teach him how to catch criminals. Emma smiled, remembering Tommy's earnest questions about her confrontation with Morrison. The boy had a natural sense of justice that reminded her strongly of Jessica, and she had promised to help him with a school report about heroes in real life. Speaking of fighting bad guys, Daniel continued, the prosecutor's office called this morning. They want to know if you're interested in consulting on similar cases. Apparently, your experience with Morrison has given you insights into how these cover-up operations work. Emma had been expecting this conversation. Over the past year, she had received dozens of calls from victims of political corruption, people who had been threatened or silenced by powerful figures who thought they were untouchable. Many of them had stories remarkably similar to Jessica's, and Emma had found herself naturally stepping into an advocacy role. I've been thinking about that too, she said. I want to help, but I also want to finish my education. I've changed my major to criminal justice with a focus on political corruption investigations. That's perfect. You could work part-time with the prosecutor's office while finishing your degree. It would give you practical experience and help other families find the justice they deserve. Emma walked back to the window, looking down at the busy street below where ordinary people were going about their daily lives, unaware of the powerful forces that shaped their world behind the scenes. A year ago, she had been one of those ordinary people, focused on college assignments and part-time jobs, never imagining that she was connected to a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. Daniel, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret not having a normal life? Building your company, making all that money, dealing with corporate politics instead of just being ordinary? Daniel considered the question carefully. I used to think that success was measured by how much power you could accumulate, how many people answered to you, how much money you could make. But this past year has taught me that real success is measured by how many people you can help, how much good you can do with the resources you have. Emma nodded, understanding what he meant. I've been offered book deals, movie rights, speaking engagements. Publishers want me to write about my experience. Producers want to turn it into a television drama. Everyone wants to profit from Jessica's story. And what do you want? I want Jessica's story to mean something beyond entertainment or profit. I want it to inspire other people to speak up when they see corruption or injustice. I want it to show victims that they don't have to suffer in silence. Daniel stood up and joined Emma at the window. You could establish a foundation. Use the media attention and any money from book deals to create an organization that helps victims of political corruption. Call it the Jessica Cross Foundation. For truth and justice. Emma felt a spark of excitement at the suggestion. That's perfect. We could provide legal assistance, protection services, and advocacy for people who are being threatened or silenced by powerful figures. We could fund it through Crosstech Industries and use my business connections to recruit volunteers and supporters. Imagine what we could accomplish with that kind of platform. Emma turned to look at her uncle, seeing not just the successful businessman, but the man who had risked everything to protect a niece he had never known existed. You would do that? Use your company's resources to fight political corruption? Emma, building Crosstech Industries was about proving I could succeed on my own terms. But this past year has shown me that success without purpose is hollow. Jessica died fighting for truth and justice. The least I can do is honor her memory by continuing that fight. Emma felt tears welling up in her eyes, overwhelmed by the generosity and love that Daniel had shown her since the day they first met. She would be so proud of you, of both of us. She would be proud of the woman you've become. Jessica raised you for 9 months, but you chose to become someone who fights for justice, who stands up for victims, who refuses to be silenced by threats or intimidation. That's not something that can be taught. It's something that comes from within. Emma hugged her uncle tightly, feeling the bond that connected them, not just as family, but as partners in a mission that was bigger than either of them alone. When do we start? How about today? I'll have my lawyers draw up the foundation paperwork, and you can start reaching out to the victims who have been contacting you. We'll need office space, staff, and a budget, but we have the resources to make this happen quickly. Emma pulled back from the hug with a determined smile. I know exactly who I want to hire as our first investigator. Oh, Detective Rivera. She's finishing up with the federal task force next month, and she's been talking about wanting to work in the private sector. Who better to head up our investigations than the woman who solved Jessica's case? Daniel nodded approvingly. Brilliant. Rivera knows how these corruption networks operate, and she has the law enforcement connections we'll need to be effective. Over the next several hours, Emma and Daniel worked together to outline their vision for the Jessica Cross Foundation. They would provide legal assistance to victims of political corruption, fund investigations into cover-up operations, and offer protection services for whistleblowers and witnesses. The foundation would also work to change laws and policies that allowed powerful figures to silence their victims with threats and intimidation. Emma's phone rang as they were discussing potential office locations. The caller ID showed her adoptive mother's name, and Emma answered with a warm smile. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Your father and I saw the news about Morrison's sentencing. Linda Parker had been Emma's anchor throughout the chaos of the past year, providing unconditional love and support even as Emma's world was turned upside down. The Parkers had never made Emma feel guilty for seeking out her biological family, and they had embraced Daniel and Tommy as extended family members. I'm doing well, Mom. Daniel and I are working on something new, a foundation to help other families who are dealing with similar situations. That sounds wonderful, honey. Your father and I are so proud of you. Not just for what you did to bring Morrison to justice, but for how you've handled everything with such grace and maturity. Emma felt a warm glow at her mother's words. I learned from the best. You and Dad taught me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Well, you certainly proved that. Listen, we're planning to drive up to Seattle next weekend. Maybe we could all have dinner together. You, Daniel, Tommy, and us. I'd love to cook for everyone. That sounds perfect, Mom. Daniel's been wanting to try your famous lasagna. After Emma hung up, she realized how lucky she was to have two families who loved her unconditionally. The Parkers had given her stability, values, and the confidence to pursue justice even when it was dangerous. Daniel and Tommy had given her a connection to her biological heritage and a sense of purpose that extended beyond her own life. Family dinner next weekend? Daniel asked. With Linda's legendary lasagna, you're going to love it. Daniel smiled, remembering how Jessica had always talked about wanting to have big family dinners with everyone she cared about gathered around one table. Jessica would have loved that. All of us together, sharing stories and planning ways to make the world a little better. Emma looked out the window again, but this time she wasn't seeing the bustling city below. She was imagining the future, a foundation that would help hundreds of families find justice, a legal system that protected victims instead of silencing them, and a political culture where corruption couldn't hide behind threats and intimidation. Daniel, do you think we can really make a difference? Not just with individual cases, but with the system as a whole? Emma, you've already proven that one person with courage and determination can bring down the most powerful corruption network in the state. Imagine what we can accomplish with resources, staff, and a clear mission. Emma nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility and the thrill of possibility in equal measure. She had started this journey as a confused college student looking for answers about her biological parents. Now she was preparing to dedicate her life to ensuring that other families wouldn't have to endure the same suffering that Jessica had experienced. "There's one more thing," Emma said, pulling a small box from her purse. "I wanted to show you this." She opened the box to reveal a simple gold necklace with a pendant shaped like a phoenix rising from flames. "Elizabeth Warren gave this to me last week. She said Jessica wore it every day after I was born, as a reminder that sometimes beautiful things can emerge from the ashes of tragedy." Daniel studied the necklace, recognizing it as something Jessica had treasured, but never understanding its significance until now. "It's perfect. Jessica would want you to have it." Emma fastened the necklace around her neck, feeling her mother's presence in a way that was both comforting and inspiring. "I'm going to wear it every day, just like she did, as a reminder that her sacrifice wasn't in vain, and that good can triumph over evil if people are willing to fight for it." As the afternoon sun began to set over Seattle, Emma and Daniel continued planning their foundation, energized by the possibility of turning their personal tragedy into a force for positive change. They were no longer just survivors of Morrison's conspiracy. They were warriors for justice, carrying on Jessica's mission in ways she could never have imagined. The story that had begun with a murder 20 years ago was finally ending, not with revenge or bitterness, but with hope and determination to build something better from the ashes of tragedy. Emma Cross Parker was ready to change the world, one family at a time, armed with the truth that her mother had died to protect and the love of a family that had emerged from the darkness of secrets and lies. Justice had been served, but more importantly, love had triumphed over fear, and truth had conquered deception. The phoenix was rising from the ashes, and its wings would carry Jessica's legacy into a future filled with hope. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.